Alright, hello everybody. Welcome to this first series video on Gen AI, or ChatGPT as you might have heard of in the news. We're going to do this series that is going to be a walkthrough guide from the ground up, as if you've never tried this stuff before. We're going to guide you through everything that you need to get started, and if your curiosities are purely from the outside looking in and you just want to know a little bit more about how this technology works, great. If you want to get started because you actually want to try to use this technology to improve your life, to improve your cognitive functions, to help you solve problems and to get ahead in this world, then stick around, because this series will eventually take us all the way up through to the point where you too will be able to sit down and code your own Gen AI, and I promise you that. If you have the patience and a little bit of spare time here and there, you can start from knowing absolutely nothing, and we'll walk through the concepts. I'll try to break them down as easy as humanly possible and get you ramped up. The QR code that you see on the screen will take you out to our site. I just have this up here just as a plug in case you found this video first and you didn't know who I was, or you didn't know what Digital Heresy was and you hadn't seen the website. We centralize around the website, and then all the other stuff kind of dovetails off of that. So we've got podcast episodes out there. The site has full-blown write-ups if you're more of a reader for how this stuff works. Some more advanced topics on the philosophy of things and what do we do as a society. All that good stuff is all launched on there. We also have a Twitter feed where I post new blog posts, new videos, so you can get notified that way. And then, of course, there's the Substack aspect to the website where you can subscribe, but you can subscribe for 100% free and you don't get any less content. I think the only thing that I start charging for on there is some kind of an auto archive for the older posts. But for as little as like $1, you can keep this stuff functioning, and you can keep 100% access to all the data that's out there. Certainly these videos will never really get hidden behind a paywall. But if you click on that QR code, you will notice that you're actually going to get taken specifically to an article called Step Zero. Step Zero was a quick post that I did where I helped try to frame what these large language models do. So large language models is the technology that sits behind the GPT thing whenever you hear it talked about in the news. A large language model is really just a special kind of machine learning model that specializes in natural language processing. So if that sounds really confusing, well, to make it really simple, you're doing that right now. As a human being, you are a natural language processor. You're hearing the words that are coming out of my mouth being piped into your ears, and there are processes inside of your brain that are taking those words and decoding them into informations and then creating the mental images in your head for everything that I'm saying, and you are doing this naturally. So the AI side of this thing is doing something similar. They just use numbers instead of brain power, and electricity instead of brain juice, although our brain juice is also electricity. You'll find that there's a common theme there where it's all related and the same. But to make it super simple, it's just processing natural language. That Step Zero article will walk you through the concepts so you can kind of visualize a framework that makes it a little simpler to approach, right? And we're kind of taking it from the aspect of walking into a library or a bookstore where there's a whole bunch of books everywhere. You have a particular topic in mind, and there's a million ways that you can go about searching for the information. So maybe you are the kind of person that likes to peruse the books for yourself and kind of read them one at a time, versus walking up to the librarian or the person that works at the bookstore and seeing if they can point you in the right direction, all the way up through all that stuff. So we break it down very simply there. If you're really confused about how this stuff works, start with Step Zero, then come back to this video, because in this video we're going to jump into actually using our first language model. So with that out of the way, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and launch a web browser. And we're going to go out to a website called openai.com. And I've got the URL in the upper left there in case you need to pause this video and type it in. And once you type it into your browser, you're going to end up on a screen that looks like this, with this beautiful animation scrolling through and showing you how AI is going to save humanity from all of its perils by having sharp young adults sitting in conference rooms and having conversations and coding things into their keyboards and highlighting random text and drawing on whiteboards. This is the company that makes ChatGPT, the most famous one that has sort of hit the news back in November and got the entire world super excited about AI again. Now, as you might imagine, AI has kind of been around for a very long time, right? Certainly, there's been aspects of it that you've seen it in the robotics videos and the smart flying drones and things like that. So, what made this space exciting, especially now into the full hype scale that it is this year, is that the natural language processing sort of graduated to this brand new level, that it is very natural, it's very smart, it's very easy to communicate with it, and most importantly, it's very simple to communicate with it from a human being perspective, where I don't know about you, but I really don't like actually dealing with my Siri and my Google and things like that, because I feel like I have to change the way that I talk to be very robotic and slow and patient, and it's a frustrating experience. And that's technically an AI that's trying to do natural language processing. So this thing blows all of that out of the water. Really simply get started with. So let's get into it. So the first thing you're going to do when you arrive at this site is you're just going to click on this Try ChatGPT link here. And for you, you might end up with a login screen where you have some options as far as how you want to log in to the website, or if you want to sign up. I believe you do have to sign up. I'm already signed up. It's 100% free, I believe. And then it just has like some throttling limitations. And also when you log in, you might not have access to ChatGPT 4, because I think that might be one of the premium settings. But ChatGPT 3.5 is already a more advanced version than the one that came out last November, and the one that by and large people are interacting with programmatically and in chat sessions like this. Orienting you to the screen when you first log in, you're going to have this chat window where you can immediately just come down here and start asking questions or saying things. You're also going to have this left hand side, and yours is where you're going to say new chat, and you're not going to have any extra topics here. The cool thing about this is I can have separate conversations with the LLM inside of a browser window, and if I want to change topics, I could sort of like, deviate the conversation within the same window, or I can simply click on new chat and start a new conversation. I like the new chat feature just because it helps me sort of organize my thoughts. You'll see that I've got some pretty random topics here that don't mean anything to you now, but they will in the future, that I keep separated. And I also like to revisit those topics from time to time, as I tend to leave them off in certain points and then I come back and revisit them. So for now, we're going to go ahead and start typing in our first questions. Now, I'm going to pause you for just one more second before we get to typing. And I want you to just close your eyes for a moment and imagine this simple question. How do you go about asking somebody else for information? How do you ask your friends for information? How do you ask your family for information? How do you ask a teacher for information? How do you ask a total stranger on the street for information? And what you're probably imagining is that you just form a question on the topic that you want to learn more about, and you just kind of blurt it out. Well, we don't necessarily notice this happening very often, but a lot of times the questions that we form initially aren't that great, usually because we form them after our own internal monologues have gotten us to a point where we've been thinking about the topic for a while, and so we are in the middle of that thought process, and by the time that we engage with that other human being, we just kind of blurt out a question about, so how about them Dodgers? And then the other person sort of has to take a pause with what they just heard and try to anticipate or guess what the context is for what you're referring to. And maybe they don't play baseball, they don't know who the Dodgers are, and so they might start having to ask you some leading questions as to what you mean. Large language models don't yet do a very good job of asking you leading questions or initiating conversations. And so the very, very, very first step in having a conversation with a large language model is to just say, pause, think about the topic that you want, and then frame an okay, decent question as an icebreaker. And what they found in their studies is that the way that the AI will kind of take the conversation when you're doing your learnings or your inquiries has a lot to do with what we do in the first few prompts that we put into this thing. Because as you'll see in a moment, We'll walk through kind of how it works visually, but the language model is going to try to keep track of the entire conversation and then kind of predict or anticipate what you mean to be looking for next, just the same way that we do in conversations with each other. As your friend starts telling you about their day, maybe they're saying something that is sort of alluding to the fact that they're having a rough day, and so you might start to anticipate responses like, I'm sorry that you're having a bad time. Oh, that sounded like that sucked. Can you tell me more? So on and so forth. Same thing here. So let's take a topic. And maybe my topic is maybe I want to learn kind of like the basics of how space shuttles work, right? Well, if I were to come in here and just be like, so space shuttles, pretty weird, right? You'll notice that it starts to kind of come back with a very, I hit it with a very open-ended question, right? And the only real context, if you think about it, if I just walked up here and I said space shuttles pretty weird, right? You might look at this and break it down and say, okay, he's asking about space shuttles, so obviously it's somewhat technical or sciencey, right? He's not asking about who won the Super Bowl, and pretty weird. So that means that there's some confusion or some oddities in space shuttles that this person might want to talk to. Now, you'll notice that it kind of clues in on that and says space shuttles are indeed unique and fascinating spacecraft. While they are no longer in operation, at least the space shuttle mission in the 2011, they played a significant role in human future, blah, 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 blah. So, what it's trying to do then with all these different bullet points and all this kind of stuff that's coming out of there is it's trying to anticipate what kinds of additional questions or information you might be implying by the fact that you just said these are pretty weird. See? And so when you get stuff that seems like it's off the rails, it's not always necessarily that this guy is trying too hard or that it doesn't really get what you're saying. Sometimes we just have to frame our questions a little bit differently, okay? So we're going to delete this chat. We're going to start over with a brand new one. Here's another one for most folks that get started with this stuff. Some of you out there are probably nervous to sit down and talk with a chat AI because it feels like you're talking to another person, and there is a certain level of anxiety that comes with talking to another human being, much less some kind of an AI that the news has been sort of pumping into your brain that it is a magical advanced being that is a million times smarter than you are, and so on and so forth. And so we tend to some folks will tend to fear having their first conversation with AI because they're concerned that what they're going to say sounds dumb, or that they have a dumb question, or that they're bothering this thing with petty things that it's so far beyond, right? And what you realize very quickly is just taking the plunge, getting in there, asking about something that you care about, and just cutting to the chase and practicing with this thing, it'll become old hat, and you'll no longer have that sort of anxiety. And if you're one of those people that struggles with just reading comprehension in general, or forming your words or using your words, this is probably one of the best unsung tools out there for developing your own language skills, your own written and communication skills, because at any point, if you get stuck here, I'm gonna show you. We're gonna go into this thing asking about space shuttles, but we're gonna do it like we're 5 years old and we really can't grasp a lot of the stuff that's happening out of this out of that concept. And so with human beings, every time we talk to them, we're always kind of gauging whether or not what we're about to say is going to sound stupid, or I don't want to sound like an idiot, and I don't even know how to ask the question. And what you'll find is you'll be able to really get a lot of insightful interpretation from these AIs, and they'll kind of handhold you along the way. Okay, so let's form our question a little bit different. Maybe by what I think about is weird is maybe what I really meant to say was, so I want to talk about space shuttles. Right? And in particular, I've always been confused as to how it takes so much fuel to get a rocket up into space when really it just has to travel in a straight line upwards. Right? Let's see what we get now. So now you'll notice that it's kind of jumping to the case, right? So instead of talking about like space shuttles in general and why they're weird, because I gave it some additional context, now it's starting to break down some of the concepts around how the space shuttle getting into space has to overcome several problems, several high-level problems in rocket science to get there. And you'll also notice that one of the things I did over here on this chat side is sort of summarized what this chat is about. So you'll get this piece for free. So let's say I'm looking through this and I say, okay, getting a rocket into space may seem like a simple task, traveling in a straight line upwards, but it's actually a complex and energy-intensive process due to several key factors. And now it starts listing out things. Some of these you're going to be able to guess: gravity, atmospheric drag. That sounds really complicated. I don't know that I know that phrase. Escape velocity also sounds complicated. Payload, that one makes sense, right? If I'm carrying a lot of stuff, it's obviously going to take more energy to try to escape. And safety margins of maneuvers, blah, blah, blah. So we're getting a very verbose, what they call a verbose answer here, and it's talking about Newton and all this other junk. And this is where sometimes people that sit down with these things, they get confused and their eyes kind of glaze over because there's so much going on here, right? Well, I'm going to teach you your first little trick here, and that is, and feel free to be like chatty with it, right? You don't have to talk to this thing like a Siri where you have to like use specific keywords. You can speak to this thing extremely naturally and as if you were talking to another person, and it will react accordingly, right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say, wow, that's way more complicated than I first imagined. The gravity thing makes sense to me, but some of the other concepts I've never really heard about before. Could we maybe start with number 2, and could you explain it to me in simpler terms? Or let's go for broke. Can you explain it to me like I'm 12? Okay? So a couple things here. You'll notice that unlike a traditional Siri interaction where you sort of have to get your prompt perfect the first time, because if the response from the AI is garbage or it doesn't do what you want it to do, then it's not going to remember that first interaction, and so you have to start over and just try to word it better. Here, it doesn't actually matter how incomplete your original response was, as long as you just kind of capture the topic that you want to cover and at least give it some kind of a direction. But now what you can do is you can actually follow up with what it responds with and start to actually tailor the conversation as if you were having a real conversation with a human being and you don't know what they're talking about. So this is the real beauty behind these large language models, is that it has the attention span or the context to be able to take several interactions back and forth and keep everything in mind just like we do in a conversation. Also notice that I didn't have to sit here and say, hey, could you explain? And then I had to come in here and highlight atmospheric drag because I can't even spell the dang thing, right click and hit copy and then paste it down in here. Nope. You'll notice that because it labeled these things with numbers, right, the number 2, I can infer in here by saying, could we maybe start with number 2, again referencing this without having to be explicit, and can you please explain that to me like I'm 12? So we're going to see if it's able to both dynamically reference this one part of the explanation when it gave me several aspects, and we're going to see if it uses smaller words and easier concepts to understand. There we go. So here we go. So you'll notice that right away it picks up in exactly what we were talking about. Of course, let's break down concept number 2. It reiterates it for me as atmospheric drag in simpler terms for a 12-year-old. Okay? Now here we go. Tell me if this resonates. Imagine you're riding a bicycle on a windy day. When you pedal your bike, you can feel the wind pushing against you, right? It's a bit harder to ride your bike into the wind because the air is slowing you down. That's kind of like what happens to rockets when they go up into space. When rockets launch, they have to go through the Earth's air, which is called the atmosphere. This air is like the wind for the rocket. As the rocket goes up, it has to push through all the air in the atmosphere, just like you have to pedal harder when you ride your bike into the wind. So already, like, I almost can stop here. This right here is such a great, concise explanation for atmospheric drag that anybody can picture the bicycle in the wind and picture, trying to ride home upwind and just hating life because I'm sitting there pedaling like a maniac trying to overcome what's happening, and not unsimilar to the rocket. I'm just trying to travel in a straight line. So why is that so hard? All right. And so you'll notice that I can keep chaining through that. So I can come in here and say, wow, that really, really helps. Thank you. Now let's move on to, now let's pick a different topic, right? So I scroll back and I say, all right, what was the next one I didn't understand? Escape velocity. Okay. Let's move on to topic 3. Could you explain it in simpler terms too? Of course. See, look at this. Concept number 3, escape velocity. So now I'm not even, you know what I mean? This isn't like, within the next response. Now it's having to reference stuff 2 or 3 steps back. Pulls out escape velocity. What do I get? You're playing with the ball on the ground and you throw it into the air. The ball goes up for a while, but then the gravity pulls it back down to the ground. If you throw the ball harder, it goes higher before gravity brings it back down. Now the Earth is like a giant playground, and you can see where this is going, right? Obviously, escape velocity means I have to throw that ball really, really, really freaking hard to get it out of the Earth's atmosphere and into space. And so that's what rockets have to go through too. And so you see, I could keep going through this conversation and plugging through these things, and I'm going to get a really clear understanding. Pretty simple, right? So, as daunting as this sounds, pick a topic. Pick a simple topic that makes sense and just get used to how to interact with it, how to lead it through the conversation, how to take the pieces that automatically make sense to you and ask it about the stuff that's a little more difficult. Ask it to put it into terms that make it a little simpler. And then I'm going to show you one last trick in this episode, and we're going to wrap it up, okay? New to sort of like ChatGPT, I'm not sure that other systems have this quite just yet. If you come down to your name down here, which I have mine blocked with this logo, but if you click on your name down here, you're going to get a little menu. And you're going to get this thing called custom instructions. This is pretty magic. Inside of custom instructions, I can come in and I can give it information about myself to provide better responses. And so this might be stuff like, I am a teacher who teaches high school students or something like that, right? And so my interests for GPT are to help improve my lesson plans and other activities for my students, right? Or from a behavioral perspective, let's recreate what we just did. I have a hard time with scientific topics, but I'm really curious to learn. So please explain complex topics to me like I'm 12. Okay? So I'm not even going to put anything in here necessarily about me. Like I don't have to come in here and say I'm 12, right? I don't have to pretend. I can just say in my preferences that I would like to have things explained to me at a certain level. And then I can also say something like, you can also speak to me informally, and you can call me Digital Heretic. Right, this kind of goes back to the whole like this thing on this clue on the side of this is how do you want to be addressed. Okay, if I hit save here, that saves my preferences. Now that's not going to affect the chat that's going on here, but let's go ahead and do our experiment again. And just to make it simple, I'm going to go ahead and copy this exact question that we started with that kind of took us down this initial rabbit hole, right, where we had all these sort of like big giant scary statements that didn't make a whole lot of sense to us, and we're going to start over. And you'll notice that because I had the whole feature turned on for enable for new chats, now before I even get into this window, we're going to see if it's going to take my preferences into account. So I'm just going to ask it the exact same questions. I want to learn about space rockets, but I've been confused as to how it gets into space. Okay. Pretty impressive, right? Number one, hey there, Digital Heretic. So it picked up on my naming preference automatically. You'll notice I didn't say what my name was anywhere in here. That came 100% from my preferences. And you'll notice that even though I didn't use the word science once in the prompt, all it's talked about was space shuttles. But in my prompt I said, I have a hard time with scientific topics. The large language model was intelligent enough and creative enough to infer the fact that space shuttles are a scientific space shuttles and space launches and all this other stuff is a scientific topic, and so therefore it invoked my request to have it explain it to me like I'm 12. And you'll notice that instead of getting a big bullet list with scientific terms, it jumped right into using an analogy about jumping really, really high as a metaphor for getting into space in a rocket. That's pretty powerful, right? So now, I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care how technical or non-technical you are. You come in here, sign up for this thing, spend a little bit of time in this custom instructions, kind of telling it about yourself. Don't get too creepy here. Just give it the high level details. Tell it how you want to be addressed. Tell it what you like to have your information delivered to you as, and bang. You can immediately start asking questions, getting good information, and learning and practicing right out of the gate. And so with that, we're going to stop there. We're going to get into some additional aspects around how this conversation kind of flows long term. This whole ability for it to kind of keep track of conversations for infinity is not exactly 100% accurate. We're going to have to talk about things like token limits. But I'm hoping that this first episode at least gets you jazzed and shows you just how simple it is to jump in and get started with these language models. Pretty much a lot of them work the same way, whether you're doing Bard or Claude or any of those other ones. If those other programs don't have, keep missing the click, if those other programs don't have this ability to sort of like set up a preference, then all you really would have to do is kind of do what we did the first time, which is take this prompt and just kind of work it into the conversation, right? So we'll get into some of the fun tricks that you can play with this, but at the very least, get in there, get exploring. This stuff is easy to get into. You can get so much benefit out of this. If you follow the step 0, then you know that this thing basically has access to entire libraries worth of information at your fingertips. It doesn't replace 100% of all research tasks, but it can really, really, really give you the quick and dirty Cliff Notes for how things work and at least set your mind in the right direction and enabling your curiosity to take you further. Okay? That's about time for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for all your support, and we will see you in the next one.